Okay, hello YouTube. I've decided I'm going to be doing a video on how to refute the Blackmar Diemer Gambit. And of course, if you've seen any of my other videos, you know that whenever I do opening videos, I kind of like to do opening surveys, and I like to take from games of very strong players, and I like to cite those games. And that actually made doing this video a little difficult because I'll be honest. No strong player in their right mind is playing a Blackmar Diemer Gambit, so there isn't really anything to call games from. When somebody was asking me about the Blackmar Diemer Gambit the other day, they were asking what exactly is unsound about the Blackmar Diemer Gambit. And if you don't know what it is, it goes d4, d5, e4, d takes f4, and then at some point white plays f3, trying to get black to take when he intends to take back with the knight. Now, to understand what's unsound about it, first we have to understand really what the Blackmar Diemer Gambit is trying to do. I call the Blackmar Diemer Gambit a more sophisticated attempt at the four-move checkmate. So if you don't know what the four-move checkmate is, it's basically e4, e5, queen f3, knight c6, bishop c4, where we double attack f7, and if black misses that it's mate in 1, then we can play queen takes f7 checkmate. And of course, a lot of amateurs win games this way. But of course, the refutation for the four-move checkmate is the move knight f6, and that prevents the queen from going to f7, and then, black is fine. Now, the Blackmar Diemer is, in my mind, it's kind of the same thing. But basically, it revolves around white getting this open f file, and then later on, he can use this open f file for an attack against the castled king. And he can try to make some very cheap checkmate shots kind of work out. And if those checkmate shots don't work out, well, then he's down a pawn, and that's it. That's pretty much the whole gambit. So we'll start out just with the basics. So e4, d takes e4. The first move of the Blackmar Diemer Gambit is actually knight c3. If white wants to play the Blackmar Diemer, he actually has to play knight c3 first, because already he's in ridiculous trouble. If he plays f3, we can immediately play e5, and this is apparently very, very good for black, even though white doesn't lose a whole pawn. After d takes c5, queen d1, king d1, we take on f3, knight takes f3, knight c6. This position is already considered decisive advantage black according to Stockfish. Basically, eventually we're going to harvest the pawn on e5, and the rook really doesn't have a good way to get into the game. I'd like to cite a game, but I won't because I don't have any good games to show you from here. All the games are pretty much just from, amateurs or 1500s playing each other, so, this definitely isn't best place. So I'll just cite Stockfish 12. I had Stockfish 12 play against itself. That game continued bishop d3, knight on g to e7, rook e1, knight g6. Bishop g5, and I'll just point it out just because I know everybody's going to ask, could we take to try to protect this pawn longer? And the line that Stockfish gives is hg6, h3, bishop e3, knight c3, bishop e6, and then say knight e4, we would castle queenside with check, bishop d2, self-pinning. And again, there's no way to get this rook into the game. There's no way to develop the king because the king moved early in the opening. And then knight d4 is the move Stockfish gives. And again, this is just decisive advantage black. But I know a lot of you that you're going to want to watch until the pawn goes away. So knight d4, rook d4, knight f2, and then bishop d5. Lots of stuff is hanging, and there's just nothing. There's no good move here. Bishop g5 is being threatened. Rook hd8 is being threatened. This king is still in the middle. Bishop takes g2 is being threatened. At this point, something's got to give. So an example would be like g4, bishop h4, creating a pin. Rook f1, bishop f2, rook h3, and now the decisive advantage should be pretty obvious to everybody. Okay, so e5 pretty much is death in this position. We don't need to go into a ton of details about that, except, Stockfish thinks this is over +2 already, or at least a point and a half after e5. It's pretty ridiculous. So if they're going to play this, they have to play knight c3 to avoid e5, so that they have some sort of counter. So after knight to c3, knight f6, f3, ef3, knight f3, we start the Blackmar Diemer Gambit. So here's the idea. So after black, just fee and shadows, because I like the idea of targeting this pawn, because we're going to play bishop g4, bishop g7, castles, and we're going to put pressure on d4, and this is an important defensive concept. White's going to play bishop c4, putting pressure on f7, bishop g7, castles, castles, queen e1. This is White's basic idea. He wants to play queen e1, and then after bishop g4, he wants to play queen h4. Now, bishop g4 is actually a really important defensive concept, and queen h4 is apparently White's attacking concept. White's basic attacking concept in the Blackmar Diemer is to play queen h4 and then have some idea like bishop h6, knight g5, and then sacrifice his rook on f6 to get checkmate on h7 in some combination. So like bishop g7, king g7, and then rook f6, and then queen h7. Now, how exactly Black would have to play to allow all this, or to allow any kind of attack that would work without some serious tactical recourse, I'm not exactly sure. I tried coming up with kind of a fantasy variation for White, where Black misses every tactical opportunity to stop everything. And I came up with something like this. Maybe Black would have to play a6, and then still, we can't play bishop h6 right away, because if we do, we have simply bishop takes h6, queen takes h6, and then bishop f3, rook f3, queen d4, which is completely winning. And then I'm not sure if we take this free piece after rook h3, if we just play knight on b to d7 and then say shuffle this knight after knight e4, so it looks like they're getting something. If we just shuffle this knight back to f8 to protect h7, we can really never ever lose. I mean, even if they play knight g5, we just play with the rest of our pieces. Nothing is at risk here. And this is completely winning according to Stockfish. Stockfish actually gets us +8 for Black, unbelievably enough. And I had to keep kind of making Stockfish's moves for it, because if Stockfish takes over, Stockfish actually wants to play queen h4 and trade queens. So I guess a human player is at least going to try to keep the pieces on the board. So you've got that going for you if you're playing the Blackmar Diemer. But basically, the difficulty in the Blackmar Diemer is pretty straightforward. Is after knight c6, at any point if we get our attack going, we're going to play bishop takes f3 and we're going to play queen takes d4. And that's pretty much going to end the attack. And if all else fails, we just need to make sure we play h5 before they trap us in with some sort of bishop h6 or anything else. But rest assured, the computer assessment for all of this is just ridiculously good for Black, even already. And this is why we can't find, I mean, literally any high-level games. I can't, if you narrow your search to just players above 2,500, that it just doesn't, at a certain point, it just doesn't exist anymore. You just don't have any games. So bishop e3, I guess, to hold the d4 square. And then, of course, my recommendation is just, I mean, the only real threats that White could generate would be with knight g5. So we just go ahead and eliminate this knight. And then rook f3. And I guess the only real threats that White's going to be able to generate is if he can double up his rooks. And there is a little bit of risk here. If he can double up his rooks and he can bring his material to bear on the f7 square, we could be in some trouble. So basically, my recommendation, because there's actually multiple moves that are possible here. I did find one top game from this position, unbelievably enough. Of course, Black won. And Black played what's considered the strongest move, although it does contain some risk. He played the move e5, which, according to Stockfish, is the best move, and it apparently wins the most material. I wouldn't personally hazard this, and actually, even in the game, there was some potential for White after rook af1, ed4, bishop g5, dc3, rook f6. The person playing Black, he just traded queens here. He played queen d4, and that pretty much ended the majority of the attack, and he went on to win, and that was enough for him. He could have continued cold-bloodedly with c takes b2, and according to the computer, this is apparently major advantage Black, but of course I'm just looking at White's attack, and White's attack actually looks pretty scary. So I don't see any reason to try e5. I think we just continue with just blunting White's initiative. We just play a move like queen d7. And the idea is pretty simple. We got rid of the knight before it became a danger, so now we're just going to play queen g4 and get rid of the queen before it becomes dangerous. And this basically refutes the whatever's left of the this Blackmar Diemer Gambit. I mean, if he plays rook h1, we have plenty of time to play queen g4 before he gets a chance to play rook h3, and then they have to exchange queens. I mean, there's just absolutely nothing here. So there's absolutely nothing to worry about at this point. So, I mean, and if you want to do a brief calculation, rook h1, queen g4, queen takes queen, queen takes, and then bishop takes here, we could actually even take. We could play rook takes, because then the bishop on e3 is hanging. And this would just be a totally winning position for black. So what does white do if he wants to keep playing this position? The only thing I could kind of come up with was maybe he plays h3 to prevent queen g4. And then we would just develop our other rook a d8, and put that pressure on the d4 square. And it's difficult for white to push this pawn because, of course, knight e5 will fork rook and bishop. And now it's just difficult for white to find another move. So because we're putting so much pressure on d4, we're actually threatening to take right now. I figured, okay, maybe rook d1. And then we just play knight e8, just continuing to stack pressure under that square. I'm expecting knight e4, knight d6. And notice we've actually kind of abandoned this side of the board. We're not even very concerned about knight g5 anymore as a threat. If they play knight g5, we're just going to push our pawn either to h6 or h5, and we have everything well in hand. Everything's well defended. We're coming in with maybe knight f5 next, knight d4 next. There's just not enough in this position for white to survive. So actually the computer recommends knight d6, then queen d6, and then rook df1, and then we simply rip. We play bishop d4. And they do get in bishop f7 check here. But now it's rook f7, bishop takes e3 check, king h1, and now the timely h5. So once we play h5 in this position, the position is completely winning for black. So then after queen c4, king h8, b4, bishop d4, just covering. We're just going to play bishop f6, and we're also threatening knight e5. So like, for example, b5, knight e5, rook f8, we exchange the pair of rooks, and white is out of pieces. Queen f1, and this is considered -6 according to Stockfish. So, I mean, these huge computer assessments for black. But, of course, the appeal to amateurs is that at some point white gets to threaten mate in 1, and that's what they're really after. So you have to be on guard enough to see the threats and to block mate in 1. So I mean, the main thing is, like, you get into a position like this, like right here, where they just played king h1, you have to find h5, and then of course, you know, early on you kind of had to play kind of this cold-blooded bishop d4 and just be able to calculate that bishop f7 was going nowhere, that this wasn't going to lead to anything. So that's basically what you have to do. White's going to generate this kingside attack, and he's going to create these little one-shot threats, and then you have to calculate for 1 or 2 moves, and then the game is over. So he's hoping that you're going to kind of fall asleep at the wheel when you get to a critical position like this, and that maybe after bishop f7, rook f7, maybe you just fall asleep at the wheel and play some random move and you get mated on h7 somehow. I don't know exactly what white is hoping for, and maybe this works in a bullet game, maybe this works in a blitz game, and maybe this works where people are capable of falling asleep at the wheel. But you're certainly not going to see people try this at the 2500 level, and you're not going to see people play this when people have enough time to calculate these variations and simply just find moves that don't lose with a computer assessment that's so high. So anybody that prepares their game with any kind of engine, anybody who's ever worked with an engine, or anybody that can just kind of calculate competently, is going to do just fine with the black pieces. Just remember, as soon as white makes threats, I mean, you can even play early h5 if you're worried about it. Like if you're worried about your calculating ability, even way back here, as soon as they play h4, there may actually be nothing wrong with just throwing in an early h5. But then I don't necessarily recommend it because I like exchanging the pieces. I think that's the most correct way of doing things. And I like to keep pressure on d4 because there's also the potential that white could whip up some pressure on f7. So I like to just save h5 for when there's a threat. When he's threatening mate in 1 or mate in 2, we play h5 and that meets the threat, and that's pretty much the end of it. So that's the refutation for the Blackmar Diemer Gambit. And again, that's kind of the reason that we don't see it on the Grandmaster level basically at all. I mean, even just doing this video, I couldn't really find any examples of this opening at the highest levels. So that's how we deal with it, that's how we refute it, and that's how we basically just win games. You just go after the material, you trade when the threats become possible. You put pressure on D4, and you play the correct tactical sequences when they present themselves, and that's pretty much it. And your computer assessment at the end of all that's going to be somewhere between +6 and +8. So I think that's a pretty high payoff. Anyways, I hope you found this video helpful, and I hope you learned something new about chess. Thank you for watching.